Whether it's on the streets of Hong Kong or whether it's on the streets of Havana, Cuba, it is incredible to see the footage of people who want freedom. The imagery we've seen just this week from Havana, chanting for liberty and waving whose flag? America's flag. That should make us proud for what this country has always represented since 1776. But there's a problem. There seems to be a new administration willing to use the powers of the state, the kind of police state tactics we see in places like Hong Kong and Cuba here against Americans. Just in the last few days, the revelations that a certain media individual was surveilled by the National Security Agency has led members of Congress to ask the NSA, why are you spying on American journalists? Is this a one-off, or should we all be concerned? For me, as the child of Paul and Susan Gorka, who escaped a communist regime, an actual dictatorship, I've always had issues with those who say, yes, it's getting to be like that here in America. We don't have gulags yet. We don't have the kinds of political prisons that my father escaped from during the revolution of 1956. We don't quite have dictators of the ilk of Matyas Rákosi, the individual called the Poisoned Dwarf, who was the bloodthirsty dictator of Hungary after World War II. We haven't yet seen a revolution against our oppressors in the modern age, not since 1776. Not like in Hungary in 1956, when the Soviets rolled in and brave freedom fighters resisted, many at the cost of their lives. But the comparison is still important to make. Why? Because of the events that have been revealed in the last few years. Remember 5 years ago, President Trump was ridiculed when he said in a tweet and then afterwards at various events that his offices, his campaign had been wiretapped. Well, in fact, the truth is it had been. That campaign, our administration, had been surveilled upon. We now know that Richard Steele, the man behind the dossier that BuzzFeed finally released across the nation, was a propagandist. Steele and his dossier about so-called Russian collusion was a figment. It was paid for by the Clinton campaign, and even the FBI, who had used that former MI6 spy as a source, knew that he was unreliable, had fired him once before it paid for that dodgy dossier. But what was the result? Was it just a flash in the pan, a stupid BuzzFeed headline? No. It led to the persecution and the targeting of a good friend of mine, an amazing patriot, General Flynn, former director of the DIA with over 30 years service in uniform to our nation, who as a result of the actions of Fusion GPS, corrupt FBI leadership, the NSA, the CIA, and BuzzFeed, was forced from office, made to resign just days after becoming the National Security Advisor to the Trump administration. Not only that, his name was illegally unmasked, and we found out that hundreds of US citizens had been illegally targeted and unmasked by the last administration. US citizens who should not be spied upon without a warrant were surveilled by the Obama administration and then targeted by former Obama administration officials who were still in positions of power. How high did the corruption go? To the very highest levels. And they admitted it. They confessed. In front of an audience, Jim Comey joked about how he set up and framed General Mike Flynn.
You look at this White House now, and it's hard to imagine two FBI agents ending up in the same room. How did that happen?
I sent them. Something I probably wouldn't have done or maybe gotten away with in a more organized investigation, a more organized administration. If the FBI wanted to send agents into the White House itself to interview a senior official, you would work through the White House counsel, and there'd be discussions and approvals and who would be there. And I thought, it's early enough, let's just send a couple guys over.
But it's not just retired generals in the White House. It could be any of us. Here we have Jim Clapper, the former chief intelligence officer, lying to Congress about whether or not average Americans are surveilled by the NSA.
If you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
Not wittingly? That's a lie. We now know that they do spy on Americans. And it's not just back then, it's getting worse in the last 5 months. The new Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has said that we need to target a new enemy. The number one enemy isn't Al-Qaeda, isn't Russia, isn't Chinese intelligence, isn't the Iranians. It's quote-unquote white supremacists here in America. Have you met any white supremacists? Because I haven't, but apparently that's the number one enemy America faces. And that kind of language has led to political persecution. We'll be talking later in the Gorka Reality Check to Julie Kelly of American Greatness. She is one of the very few people who've documented the new breed of political prisoners who are locked in solitary confinement since January the 6th. Some of them grandmothers, accused of quote-unquote insurrection. That is political persecution. But nobody should be surprised. This isn't just the new administration. Do you remember what happened during the 8 years of the Obama regime? Obama spied on journalists, used the Espionage Act more than any other president since it was first enacted. He went after journalists like James Rosen. The NSA was used to target individuals who were seen as a political threat to the Obama administration. And most disturbing of all, in the last few days, the vaunted, the formerly prestigious FBI has openly encouraged Americans to dime out their relatives, to betray their fellow family members if they see some kind of indication of radicalism. What is radicalism? Wearing a hat that's red that says "Make America Great Again"? So even though my parents escaped real dictatorship, finally, as an immigrant to this country, as an American citizen, with heavy heart, I have to admit that we are moving towards the use of police state tactics in America. And as we know, with the first accusation by candidate Trump, he was vindicated. He was surveilled upon, and individuals like myself, Steve Bannon and others, were spied upon, not during just the campaign, but when we served in the White House. One man who has done more than anybody else to uncover the truth and to stop the deep state tactics is one congressman from California, from the 22nd District, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, the subject of the Plot Against the President book and movie, and we welcome him as our first guest here on the Gorka Reality Check. Congressman Devin Nunes, welcome.
Sebastian, thanks, and thanks for having me on. A very very troubling monologue that you just gave there in introduction. It's sad to see what's happening in the United States right now. It's hard to explain and hard to believe.
Well, look, you're our sanity check here on the Reality Check because you've been there. You have the clearances. You've seen the stories of the unmaskings, the fabrication of evidence against Carter Page and others. Is my monologue, is my summary hyperbole? Tell our viewers, our millions of viewers across the nation, what you have seen, not just in the last 4 years or 8 years, but in the last 5 months in America.
Well, I think what you did is you capsulize what's really happening in the United States, and I think what a lot of Americans are feeling, but you're putting facts together, you're piecing together facts dating back, and I would say that this actually goes back to the Obama administration, and I'll take you back to a time that a lot of people have forgot. The first time that we saw the intelligence services being used to target Americans and be used for political purposes actually happened during the Iran nuclear deal, where little bits and pieces of information were getting out about American citizens, and then those American citizens had, wait a second, those were private phone calls, private emails. Where did this come from? That was the first time that we saw using the intelligence services for political purposes. And now, you fast forward, we can go through the entire Russia hoax Steele dossier. I think you did a pretty good job, but in the last 5 months, what you see, and Julie Kelly has done just a phenomenal job. She's an amazing investigative journalist who's someone who wasn't even a journalist, isn't even a trained journalist, by the way. She just got into this because during the Russia hoax, she started to see her country going down the tubes. And how is it possible that you have so many of these people being held in jails? What happened to due process, on the supposed insurrection? And I agree with you. This whole idea of white supremacists, I don't know any white supremacists. Never met one. Don't even know where they're at. So how can it be that a longtime federal judge, someone who wanted to be on the Supreme Court, is now the Attorney General and is out talking in wild conspiracy theories that's all going along with a fake news narrative that the socialist Democrats in this country want? And here you have, you showed a few pictures of what's happening in Cuba, but I will say you haven't even seen the worst of it. People are being dragged out of their homes. Now, I think what's happening is a lot of that is too gruesome for television networks, but you would think that somewhere in the Biden administration, they would say, whoa, this is enough. But it's not happening. I've seen video after video, Dr. Gorka, that is showing people being drug out, being beaten, being dragged out by their hair, young women. This is outrageous. So where we go from here, there's going to have to be an awakening in this country where our fellow family members and friends and neighbors say, whoa, this is not an America that I remember. It's not an America that I want to be part of. I want the America of where we live in freedom back in this country. And it's going to take rooting out and kicking all of these horrible individuals out of government, many who have been building up this socialist hierarchy. It's really structured as a Politburo, where we end up with Pelosi, who's been there for 50 years in politics, Biden, who's not even coherent, clearly has cognitive problems. How's he the president of the United States, campaigning from the basement? How did this all happen? And it really happened this way. I wrote about it in the book that you see behind me. And that came out before the last election. I warned about it. It happened. It was really simple. They own the propaganda. So 95% of the so-called journalism is what they want, and they follow that narrative. And then once you run it through the social media companies, you end up with so many people that are absolutely just brainwashed. That's how we got here. That's how I see it.
Well, I know one thing. Everybody has to get re-engaged. We have to win the elections next year, get you back as the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. It's not a time to give up. It's a time to double down. If you don't know what this man did for America in the last few years, you've got to read Lee Smith's book, The Plot Against the President. You've got to watch the movie by Amanda Milius. Both Lee and John Solomon, who know so much about what this man did, will be with us later. God bless you, Congressman Nunes. I'm Sebastian Gorka. This is the Gorka Reality Check.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.